channel 2 is?
We can turn it down.
I have.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. My name is R.L. Rousey. I am the Education Programs Artistic Director for the Sun Valley Summer Symphony. Thank you. Welcome to Lawn Chat number 3 for this season. An exciting collection of folks. I have just a couple of bits of information and then I'll turn this over to Samir and let him guide you into this evening's concert. Allie, who takes care of all things magical around here. She makes sound happen and makes lights go on and all kinds of great things. She and I just ran over from the community school, and I know a few of you were there for that concert as well. We just finished, I think, 7 concerts in 3 days, something like that, with the students who've been studying in the Summer Music Institute. And we just finished our last opera workshop and chamber music concert, and it was through the roof amazing. I don't know that I could be any prouder, so I'm sort of floating on clouds trying to come down to the ground here and get you guys started on this experience. I have to say that the Sun Valley Summer Symphony is perhaps one of the strongest organizations that I know that really puts its money where its mouth, where its words go. That wasn't right at all. They truly support arts education in a real way, in a dynamic way, and I am proud to be a part of the work that goes on there. 300 students were studying music this week. That's at the community school. We fill up every room. It's pretty impressive. I will pass that applause along because it's really quite an endeavor. Let's get into this evening. If I can ask you all to do a couple of things for me. I'll grab some more chairs as we're talking because we've got some more chairs we can sit around. But starting with this season, we now live stream these chats. So if you are in line and get one of our community seats in the pavilion, and you would like to stay in that seat, you can go to our website, svsummersymphony.org, go to the event page, and we live stream the chats. You can pop your earbud in, sit in your seat, and listen to the chat. If you get home after a concert that you didn't join us for the chat, and you're going, oh my gosh, I wish I'd heard the chat, there were so many fabulous things, usually by about noon the following day, they're archived on the website, and so you can go back on and listen to any of the lawn chats along the way. So if you'll help spread the word about that, we're excited about these new opportunities that are we've added into the lawn chats because they're becoming more and more popular. I think it's all because of Samir. I only said that because his family's in the back. Let me get you into this chat this evening. This is Samir Patel, our associate conductor for the Sun Valley Summer Symphony.
Thank you, RL. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so excited because these crowds are getting bigger and bigger. So it's great to see you all this evening. And for those of you that joined us the other night for Time for Three, I hope you enjoyed that very special performance. We have something a bit different for the program tonight. Of course, a piece by the great German composer Johannes Brahms, his first symphony. And so I thought I would just start off by sharing a little bit about Brahms's life. He was born in Germany, like I said, and grew up there. And as a young man, he became well established as a pianist and as a composer. And in 1854, for the first time in a live concert, he heard this music. We all know that, right? Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy. And Brahms heard this as a young man of 20, and right around the same time, he had an encounter with the Schumanns, Clara and Richard Schumann, the great composer, pianist couple that were considered the deans of musical life in West Germany. And it was Clara Schumann that, when she introduced him to her husband, said about Brahms, and just have this quote here, that she said, he was destined to give ideal expression to the times. So already as a young man, he had this weight on his shoulders, if you will. And what that meant for a young man at that time in the 1850s was daunting, because for Brahms, his great hero was Ludwig van Beethoven. Beethoven died in 1827, and Brahms was still feeling this weight behind him of Beethoven, this great legacy behind him, and he wanted to honor it. And it was because Brahms saw himself in this lineage of Germanic composers composers such as Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven and Schubert and Schumann and Mendelssohn, etc., etc. Brahms felt connected to them. And one of the ways he felt connected to them was he was a passionate believer in their compositional output, specifically their formulaic attention to music. So for instance, we know perhaps some of the great symphonies of the past of those composers I mentioned, and a lot of them stuck to these traditional forms, what we call sonata allegro forms. Some of you who have studied music will probably know the names exposition, development, recapitulation. These were the hallmarks of sonata allegro form, and they formed, at the time, a lot of the symphonies that had been written by some of those great composers I had mentioned. But by the time Brahms was establishing himself, Clara Schumann and Robert Schumann also suggested that he should write a symphony. And it wasn't until 1876 that Brahms wrote his first symphony. It took him 21 years to write this first symphony. Like I said, he felt this daunting weight on his shoulders of Beethoven's legacy, but also because already by 1830, this concept of sonata form, of symphonic sonata form, was already old-fashioned. And to play an example, I think you might recognize this piece. It was written in 1830, just 3 years after the death of Ludwig van Beethoven. Also a symphony. You might have to listen carefully. That doesn't sound like Beethoven, does it? That was written by a young Frenchman named Hector Berlioz, called Symphonie Fantastique, which if you're familiar with the work, it has a fascinating story, somewhat autobiographical in some ways, talking about a young composer who's filled with desire for a woman that doesn't return her feelings, and so he takes a very bad hit of opium. This is what the symphony is about, believe it or not. He imagines himself marching to a guillotine, getting decapitated, and then the music you just heard is called The Witch's Sabbath, where he's surrounded in purgatory by witches and ghouls and monsters. 1830, 3 years after the death of Beethoven. Now, you can imagine in that climate when Beethoven died and you have a youngster like Berlioz, and even after that, composers like Liszt and Wagner, all bending traditions, bending forms, playing with the whole idea of what symphonic music is. And you have another reason why Brahms perhaps took 21 years to write the piece that he did, that we will hear tonight. So it, like I said, it was a long gestation for him, and I thought I would just then get into the symphony that you're going to hear itself. Like most traditional symphonies at the time, it's written in 4 movements. And it starts like this. Brahms was from the north of Germany. Well, I guess that's the Music Man, so.
Down what my single favorite element of coming to Sun Valley is.
I did not do that. I thought I did for a second, and I thought, my God, am I really playing the Music Man on my phone? We'll hear what Alistair Neal has to say for a second before I get into this.
Who are so extraordinary, with the Sun Valley audiences who are so extraordinary. There's a wonderful relationship between performing night after night with my friends for this fantastic public. I would say the creative spark in choosing this.
I guess this is going to be a moment.
Repertoire revolves around, first and foremost, the piece that we're closing the season with, and that is the Verdi Requiem. I have a very wonderful and powerful memory of seeing that piece done 35 years ago as a teenager in Edinburgh, with the great Claudio Vado and the London Symphony Orchestra and a stellar lineup of soloists. And I just will never forget the chills that this piece sent through me, especially in one particular section of the Dies Irae, which is the extraordinarily dramatic recreation of the last day of judgment. That forms the second part of the piece. And a moment.
Let's talk about the Verdi Requiem, which you'll hear at the end of the season. Thank you.
Sounding this clarion call, and I just remember the sheer physicality of that, and I thought I would love to reproduce that if we do this piece here. So from that flowed not only the Verdi Requiem, but also the Janacek Sinfonietta that requires 12 trumpets, and this extraordinary evening we have planned called Brasstacular, the trumpets of the Sun Valley Summer Symphony, a whole series of pieces arranged for 12 trumpets. All of this from one single memory 35 years ago.
So
What
you
is the Sun Valley Summer Symphony for me?
Okay, I'm going to continue with my talk, okay? Because I don't know how long that's going to go on for. But the Brahms starts like this. Not the Music Man, right? Talk about an opening to a symphony, right? If it's going to take you 21 years to write a symphony, you might as well go big like that. So Brahms starts a symphony like this. It's in the key of C minor. You guys probably know of another famous symphony in C minor, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. And this opening, to me, as you just heard, there's something defiant about it. There's something heavy about it. There's something almost tragic about it. But more than that, for me, it also represents struggle. You hear the timpani just pounding away. And I want to play this again because I would like for you to hear the woodwinds that are going contrary to what the strings are doing. So once again, here's the beginning of it, just for a few bars. Hear the woodwinds, and the strings are ascending compared to a descending one. So what I love about this movement of this symphony that you're going to hear is that for me, it's all about struggle. The whole thing, the whole first movement is all about struggle. And, you know, who is it for me to say what the symphony is actually about? I think you guys need to come up with that answer on your own as you hear it individually this evening. But I like to think of this music as, like I said, struggle. Struggling against time, struggling against the legacy, struggling to find his own music and his own voice. The second movement that you'll hear does not sound like struggle. If anything, it sounds like a love letter, right? This is music of romance. This is perhaps what we typically identify Brahms with. And the third movement of this symphony, we talked earlier about how Beethoven was his great role model in so many ways. Beethoven wrote third movements of his symphonies traditionally as scherzos, which are sort of for lack of a better description, a very fast, exciting dance. Brahms does this for his third movement. This is lyrical. It's like a breath of fresh air, isn't it? Also has some graceful movement to it. But it's in the finale to the symphony where, once again, you get some of the color from the beginning of the symphony, and in this case, It starts out in darkness, and over the course of the symphony, we get to lightness. I'd like to just play a little bit at the beginning of the finale for you, and then I'll cut to another example. Again, there's something almost uncertain and tumultuous about that music already, right off the bat. And Brahms plays with this a little bit. In fact, it's only when we get a little bit into this movement that we get an appearance of a beautiful horn solo, which Brahms heard originally as an Alp horn. You know, those long instruments you'll see in the Alps of Switzerland. And I found a clip on YouTube of an Alp horn player playing the melody. Sounds a little bit different, of course, than when you hear Bill Vermeulen play it in our orchestra, but this is what Brahms could have heard at the time. So you're going to hear that sort of emerge from the darkness of the fourth movement. And what it leads to is one of the great moments in Brahms symphonies, I believe. It's a moment of well, I'll let the music describe it. Now, something funny about this is that, of course, people originally, after hearing this moment, they likened it to this. Where we started. The Ode to Joy theme, right? And Brahms, when someone pointed out, oh, that sounds very similar to the Ninth Symphony, his remark was, well, any ass can hear that. So he very much acknowledged that you know, this theme in the finale stems in so many ways from Beethoven himself. So I hope you enjoy the performance of it. Are there any questions that I might be able to answer? Exactly. If you're going to steal from the best. You know, people always call John Williams a great film composer. You know, the guy that's given us the scores to Indiana Jones and Star Wars and so many of the great films. They say, well, he's kind of taken some of these themes. You know, Superman sounds like Death and Transfiguration. Jaws sounds like Dvorak 9. Well, yeah. And I think he would probably say the same thing. If you're going to steal something, you might as well take from some of the best. Any questions? Yes. The question is, Brahms had, even though it had taken him 21 years to finally get his first symphony out on paper, had he written other music? And the answer is yes. He had written plenty of piano music. He had written piano sonatas. He had written concertos as well. The first piano concerto was his first attempt at a symphony, and he shelved it. So he had definitely tried his hand at symphonic music in the genre of a complete symphony, but it wasn't until 1876 that he finally settled on this piece. He died in 1897. He was born in 1833, died in 1897. So if you can imagine him dying in 1897, for those of you that are well versed in music from seeing the many performances that we have here, what he would have encountered. He lived in Vienna. I mean, to make it as a musician, you had to go to Vienna, of course. And of course, throughout the 19th century, at that part of what we call fin de siècle Vienna, turn of the century Vienna, Mahler was a huge personality in Vienna at that time. Wagner had, of course, conquered all of musical Europe. Liszt, you know, and of course, getting into some of the modern composers that were around at the same time in Vienna and preparing to really shock the world. Names like Arnold Schoenberg. So, anybody else? Good. Well, thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy the performance.